This is Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, where today we look ahead to the Real Wine Fair 2024 in the company of Fair Organiser Doug Wregg. This year's edition takes place at Tobacco Dock London on Sunday 28th and Monday 29th of April. The Sunday session is open to the public and the wine trade, whereas Monday is wine trade only. In today's episode, we hear Doug's origin story, including looking back at the opening of Terroir's Bar in 2008 and the first edition of the Real Wine Fair. We talk what is the spectrum of natural wine, discuss terroir in wine. I raise the issue of the natural wine paradox in the traditional media, and Doug looks ahead to the Real Wine Fair 2024. Enjoy.
I was training to be a teacher and I didn't really enjoy that process. So I went into restaurants. My mum had a restaurant in South Kensington and I was given responsibility for the wine list, which was remarkable because I knew nothing about wine. But I'm a quick learner and self-taught, and but also with some mentors, began to sort of learn a bit about the subject and develop my own sense of taste. Scroll on a few years after being sommelier and of a couple of places, I was offered a job at this company called Les Caves de Touraine, which at that point was just 3 people and a van and a shop, and was not doing particularly any business. And the wines list revolved entirely around the wines of the southwest of France and the Languedoc. So niche within niche, I should say, and nobody was interested, and nobody in the trade really cared, whatever. It was a very sort of classic, scene in the trade. You either bought Bordeaux or Burgundy or super expensive Tuscan wines or Californian wines. And I started as a rep, literally, donning the shoe leather and pounding the streets, going to restaurants with a wine list or a bottle, and then being told that the door was what I'd just come through and I should exit fairly quickly. So I never thought this was going to be a life or a living. I was just sort of holding fire for quite some time. And then, I don't know, around the late 90s, early 2000s, I think some people were a bit more accommodating and started waking up to what we were doing, that it had a certain amount of integrity, even if they didn't think the wines were terribly commercial. Going on a few years now to about 2005, Eric, who's the founding member of Les Caves de Touraine, and I went to Paris, and we sort of fell in love with the natural wine scene, which was literally just starting at that point in Parisian wine bars and cavistes, like wine shops. And I had an epiphany. I think Eric had already had his, but just sitting in a wine bar and being given a bottle of wine and tasting it, and thought, oh my God, I've never tasted anything quite like this. I didn't even know whether I liked it. It was so strange and so provocative, and flavors that ricocheted around your mouth, smells I'd never smelled in wine. I didn't know whether it was even right or wrong. It just was. It had its own energy, which is something I talk about wine a lot, and energy, and it seemed to be true to itself. And then we tried another bottle, and from a different producer, and that was amazing, and another one, and that was amazing. And we may have just lucked out on that particular occasion, because we could have tried the same wines the previous day and they would have been terrible. And I think at that point we sort of mutually resolved that we wanted to found a wine bar, or open a wine bar, which had the wines that we loved to drink, and maybe share those wines with people in the trade that we really liked. So this is a place we envisaged as a place where you'd eat really delicious food and drink these sort of like natural, unaccommodated, unfiltered, wild wines. And so it came to pass in 2008. Terroir Wine Bar in Charing Cross, R.I.P., opened, and it was a phenomenon. And I think it was just the right place at the right time, in the right location, maybe, and the trade were entranced, and we got wonderful reviews, thankfully, from a lot of top food writers, and people just intrigued. They just wanted to explore what natural wine was. Not that we advertised it as a natural wine bar, but it became known as a natural wine bar. And I think that, in a way, at the time, before social media really was like big, it just had a big word of mouth momentum, and we got a lot of sort of, as I say, journalists, we got a lot of wine writers, we got a lot of top chefs, and it seemed to be also a resource for, like, if you were working in central London and you just wanted to sort of come in for like half an hour for a glass of strange red wine and a terrine, then people did that. It was there. It was very democratic. It was like, it was their restaurant as well. And I think off the back of that gave us a lot of confidence. It's like, oh, we know what we're doing. You know, we had no idea what we were doing, but whatever we touched seemed to sort of succeed, at least initially. And the next stage in the development was, we opened subsequent wine bars over the next 5-6 years until we had like 4 or 5 of them in London, and some doing well, like Brawn, for example. But that's more of a restaurant. But then the next thing was the Real Wine Fair, although it was called the Natural Wine Fair in 2011. We'd done a few dress rehearsals for it, and then we teamed up with Isabelle Legeron and a few other wine merchants. And in 2011, we held the Natural Wine Fair in Borough Market. And again, the publicity astounded us. It seemed to be there was a real need to have an artisan fair where the producers actually came and poured and talked about their wines. There really wasn't anything of that sort in London. And yeah, we got some bouquets and some brickbats because I think natural wine became incredibly controversial. I think that the word natural was such a loaded term that a lot of people, particularly professionals, felt it was obnoxious and that we were somehow lording it over them, pretending to an ethos that didn't exist, and, you know, like using a word which was contradictory in terms. How could wine be natural? Wine is the result of a process of transformation. And, you know, I think, what does it mean? It doesn't matter what we call it, but you know what it is. You know, you're talking about people not using chemicals and farming organically in the vineyard and not using chemicals in the winery and not sort of mucking around and shaping the wine or manipulating in dozens of different ways that you can always play with wine to make it like commercially more acceptable. It was like wine is close to what just transformed grape juice would be. I never saw why this was such a problem, but it seemed to sort of like, on the one point, provoke people to the point of anger and then, you know, intense displeasure. So what do? You either accept that or you fight back. And I'm the sort of person who I enjoy an argument. I don't enjoy a row. I enjoy an argument based on sort of like logic, but I found a lot of people were like abusing logic. They were creating a straw man of natural wine, saying, "Oh, I had this terrible natural wine. It was disgusting and bretty. All natural wines, ergo, all natural wines are disgusting and bretty." And you know, you can't let people get away with making stupid things like statements like that. Anyway, I think what has happened now is that there are always like what I call the refuseniks, and for me, you like what you like to drink. I don't disrespect people for liking conventional classic wines. I grew up with them myself. They made my palate the way it was for years. It's not what I drink now, but I honor those wines. It's just that I prefer to drink something different. And I think we have a slightly more live and let live philosophy. I think the people who were very critical of natural wines have sort of calm down a bit, you know. I think they accept the wines are here to stay, and it's not like they're a niche thing or a bandwagon or a trend. If I go to my local pub or to a Michelin 3-star restaurant, I will find natural wines integrated within the list. There isn't a separate natural wine section. But the wines exist. Whatever we call them, they're there, and for me, that's a sign of success. It's a sign of people voting with their palates, rather, and would do the same if you had craft beer or sourdough bread or unpasteurized cheese. I mean, it's the same sort of philosophy of like now taken out of the wine, or as little as possible taken out or added to the wine. So why wouldn't you, if you're going to do it with food and other drinks, why wouldn't you have that sort of thing with wine? But wine is always a product, and as a product is in a bottle, is perceived as something very commercial and must be commercially acceptable to taste panels. And we don't believe that. We believe that your taste is paramount. What you love is the most important thing. And if you love to drink these wines, then by all means go ahead, and don't feel you need to be judged by an expert who says that's not good what you're drinking, or that's and as has happened over the years, like, you know, we're peddling vinegar. It's extraordinary that millions of people are happily drinking vinegar. Then it's like I think natural wine helped to democratize the wine world, or part of the wine world, because it refused to accept there are hierarchies. In the natural wine world, you don't give points to wines. How do you give points to something that's alive? You don't give points to a tree. that tree is better than that tree, or that sunset is better than that sunset. The wine is living. It's one day it'll be expressive and beautiful and tender. The next day it'll be all weird and jerky and off kilter. And I think that's enchanting. I think not knowing is part of the pleasure, and that's why I really like this style or these styles of wines. And also, I would say one further thing is that natural wine is always seen as under one sort of quite small umbrella, but the spectrum of natural wines is as wide as the spectrum of all wine or all conventional wine. And you can have really straight styles, quite elegant and, understandable, and you can go right through to the far end of the funky, weird stuff. And I suspect that a lot of people think when they hear natural, think funky, weird, but actually most of it's in the middle and sort of straight style. And to be fair, my palate changes constantly, and I've moved to a slightly straighter preference to straightness over weirdness and funkiness. I admire people push the envelope, and I admire interesting tastes, but I don't necessarily want to drink a whole bottle of them. I could probably go with a glass or two, but for functionality of natural wine, I prefer the sort of slightly straighter, pure, more elegant style. And if I want to go, if I'm feeling in an adventurous mood, then okay, yes, I will open a bottle of something perhaps, what's the word? Yeah, just offbeat, but that's not me at this. It's a mood thing for starters, but it's not me as a personality. Whereas I think in the earlier days, say 2005 to 2012, yeah, I liked it funky. I dialed the funk up. But then I might have been taking a slightly contrarian position, just as the people who dislike wines, these wines took the same contrarian position from the other point of view.
So interesting, because I think you bring in so many avenues there, and I kind of forgotten actually how rich your answers are, and again how many sort of jumping off points there are. But I think that the thing that always just guides me is to just make it personal, and I think that thinking back now, now probably what is it now? It's 2016, so 8 years. Interesting. I don't think I've told you this before. The Real Wine Fair was actually the first wine fair I ever went to. Oh, I didn't know that. So that was a first for me. And without a doubt, it was that style of wine. This what I saw as something quite energetic, and something that was again still very approachable. Coming from being a beer drinker, it was something that was refreshing and light, and but still had a sense of fun. That was way more attractive to me than the kind of the classics, not really coming from a family of wine drinkers, and sort of trying the wines that I thought I was supposed to first off. They didn't do anything for me. It was actually it was something along the lines of what I was trying at a Real Wine Fair. Added as well was my interest in Spain, which I think is is increasingly an influential player in the scene as well. I think that was certainly that's a logical step for me, and that was actually the avenue that I came down. But you used a term here that I think it's fascinated me in terms of that spectrum of natural wines, because I'm happy to share my thoughts, my kind of observations. That I've seen, slightly more establishment-led publications, maybe, or professionals. I think they have some really interesting opinions when that word "natural wine" comes up. I still think that kind of divisiveness that you mentioned earlier. I still think that it's there, but it's maybe expressed slightly differently. But I think you are no doubt one of the best people to frame that conversation. So. Could you give us a sense of what are you seeing, I guess, now, and maybe a little bit to its evolution in terms of that spectrum of natural wines that's out there to enjoy?
Let's see how far we've come. I mean, I remember being invited to a wine tasting by the World of Fine Wine, and it was the first ever natural wine tasting. Well, they said for their magazine, but possibly for any sort of magazine in this country. And there were 30 wines blind tasted, and there were 5 of us on the panel, and it was written up, and not entirely positively, but at least they were opening the bottles and allowing people who like natural wines to taste and assess them. I'm I always believe that natural wines, won't perform particularly well in an environment such as a closed tasting with artificial light. I mean, these are wines of light and air and the outside. I think they need natural light, but I was delighted to see that they were being shown, at least. And you can't legislate for what the article is going to say, and the fact we were pretty split on the panel, and 3 of us loved it and 2 of us didn't, that the people who didn't love it were more the people who were writing about the wine. So you had some really silly marks as well. I mean, like wildly different, like from people thinking the wines were disgusting and shouldn't be opened to people who thought they were nectar. So this is classic. For me, this is classic natural wine. And then I think it's not been covered so much certainly not in the national press, but there have been allusions to it in professional wine magazines, because how do you evaluate something that is constantly changing and has no reference point? So if you know that a wine is consistent, day to day, bottle to bottle, even year to year sometimes, then natural wine is something that is anti all that. So it's this countercultural side of the wine trade, which seems to appeal to very few people, because surely you'd want consistency over individuality. But I don't think people are like that. I honestly believe when we talk about consumers that you're talking about all people as if they are products of conditioning, of like commercial conditioning. So consumers like this. I'm even writing a blog now about what is the taste of the average British palate. I think it's a silly thing. By definition, I believe that there are 50 million people drinking wine. Yeah, exactly. Do you like this? Do you like that? You like what you're exposed to, probably because you don't know anything else. So what we're lacking is exposure to certain things and education. And education for me, and what I find most important about natural wine, and what I sort of banging the drum for, is exploring ideas of provenance. Do you not want to know how the grapes are farmed? Do you want to know whether this is some sort of regenerative agriculture that fosters biodiversity and doesn't kill off local wildlife? Do you want to know what additives are going in the wine? Are you comfortable with not knowing? Whereas you will read, I don't know, you buy something in the supermarket and it's got a list of 100 additives. It's food. You buy a bottle of wine and it says nothing, contains sulfites, which is meaningless anyway. So why would you accept one and not the other? I suppose there's a narrow drinking class that basically they love the story. I met the farmer, I've travelled to the vineyard, or whatever like that. I don't expect everyone to have that level of engagement, but I think I would like people to maybe interrogate their taste a bit more and not be so satisfied with, like, I like one style of wine. I like sweet rosé. I like Merlot. I like Sauvignon Blanc. British taste has changed so much since, I've been in the wine trade, from the classics to the, like Merlot drinking. Chardonnay was everywhere, and then it was ABC, anything but Chardonnay. Then it was Pinot Grigio, Uber Alice. It was, and then Sauvignon was the king, queen, jack of grape varieties. People just default to the grape variety, something easy to remember, easy to recognize, easy to pull off a shelf, easy to put in a shopping basket. You don't have to take more than a few seconds to make a decision. Whereas I sort of think you should take longer to make a decision, because a really good bottle of wine is something like you can have a relationship with. Yes, it's thirst quenching. Yes, it's easy. Yes, it's alcohol. Yes, it's this. But wouldn't you like it to be a bit more than that? And if you're spending a certain amount of money on a bottle of wine, also remember that the less you spend, the less wine there is. But massively proportionately. So a £6 bottle of wine, you've got 20p's worth of wine. A £10 bottle of wine, you've got £4 worth of wine. Which is a better value? And exponentially it goes up. £20 is 12, and so on and so forth. So the more you pay for wine, the more real wine you have within the bottle. I want people to remember that wine comes from not an industrial outlet. It's the result of farming, and the more we support small farmers doing the right thing in the vineyards and making, wine without, stuff in it, chemicals in it, I think the more we are engaging with wine as a sort of what it's meant to be, like a nourishing, fairly healthy product, the more we allow people to put junk in wines without, sort of regulation. We don't know what's in it. It's probably not terribly good for us. And I think natural wine can sort of like help because it can engage in these conversations. It doesn't have to be anti-conventional wine. It just has to say, do you know what you're drinking? Do you know, would you like to know more about what you're drinking? And so that element of education, and we should do this with all foodstuffs as well. We should know more about what we're ingesting, literally.
And again, I think it's a point that we'll get to when we talk about the fair. And I think, again, I don't think it's a secret that you want to bring more wine curious, I guess, to the fair. People that are coming along primarily on the Sunday, who are paying for the ticket, who are not working in the wine trade, but want to come there, want to kind of explore. So, I mean, I think an interesting comparison, and one that it seems connected is essentially the growth of things like farmers markets and curiosity in media, in things like YouTube, in things like podcasts of people actually wanting to kind of connect with where their food is coming from. And it's an analogy that I totally agree with. And it's, for me, I think it's where maybe that, that's what we've lost when we have in this country certainly moved, much more towards shopping in supermarkets. We've lost a lot of the connection with who's making the food, and even silly things like the milk round, and that connection with where these basic foodstuffs are kind of coming from. And I just wonder if that's a sort of lens to think about with wine as well. And it doesn't necessarily, for me, it doesn't necessarily need to be, I think, people going to the winery, but I think people are just curious, and often conversations are started by something as simple as a label, and that then gives them a window into the philosophy, but even just the artistic nature or the culture or the background of the person, the real person that actually made the wine that they're holding in their hands.
Absolutely. I think one term I've forgotten to mention, because it often sounds pretentious to people who are not like in the trade, is terroir, and it's a French term, and it literally means the sense of place, or I prefer it almost like sense of origin. And then when you drink a bottle of wine, but it could be food as well, that it reminds you of a place that, even if you've never been to that place, it transports you momentarily to something. It tastes real. It tastes like authentic, and that's what terroir is. And I think natural wine is very much part of like preserving the sense of the place in which the grapes were grown, and not trying to sort of like smother it with manipulation or intervention, which somehow sort of makes it taste the same as anywhere else. So I think this is a really important term. And I think when you come to the fair, if you come to the fair, then you meet people who sort of like, it's almost, even if they're like not originally from the area where they're now farming, but they've fallen in love with that region, and they seem to be from the same soil. In a way, they are trying to communicate to you about what makes the wine the way that it is. And you'll often get like descriptions of climate and microclimate and geology and plant life, and it's a bit like going back to school, and all the subjects that you willingly gave up at GCSE or A level, you have to sort of like, you don't have to take a degree in, but you're aware that basically a glass of wine is a result of thousands of years of some geological and geographical sort of like influence, but also the culture of gastronomy, the culture of the people in the area. There's so much that goes on that makes that glass of wine what it is. And I think that's really exciting. You get more of this by engaging with the grower there, because that's what they're proud about. It's not so much, oh, I made a great wine, like this is a work of art. It's a real thing that comes from the vineyard that I farm with my hands. And look, like in the end, I don't want to muck it up by, putting chemicals in it. It's something you muck it up, but I don't want to sort of make it something that it wasn't before. I don't want to sort of try to improve upon what nature gave me. If I'm a farmer and I farmed well, then nature gave me the wherewithal to make something really beautiful. And the more I manipulate it away from that, is the more I'm getting away from what the sense of terroir, the sense of origin, which is so important to why I love to make wine. And for me, the most exciting thing about the Real Wine Fair, any artisan wine fair, is the communication between the consumer, the person who's going to be drinking the wine, and the person who makes the wine, because then you can understand the process a bit more, not the technical process of stainless steel tanks and new barrels or whatever it might be, but the process of like someone talking about their home, and why it matters to them, that whatever. And then for them, conversely, I like to see the reaction of like the person say, and having that moment of revelation. Well, sometimes I call it an epiphany if I'm being pretentious, but like, wow, okay, now I understand. If this happens a few times during the real wine fair or any wine fair, is that energy is what I sort of feed off in a weirdly parasitical way. I've been at the fair a couple of years and I've just taken a step back and I've felt all sorts of like amazing things, like the color of the wine, the ambient noise of people enjoying and talking about it, just the sense of like wine energy, and it's palpable, but I don't know how to describe it. You wax lyrical and get all poetical about it, but in the end, this is why we do it. We do it for these like strange little moments of revelation. It doesn't have to be revelation for us. It can be other people. You can see it, like the light in their face, that moment when they understand it's more than a product. It's a real thing.
Yeah, totally. And I think there are links really between, how you've just introduced to really, kind of conceptualize that kind of, mythical conversation that, that it's not one specific conversation, but it's that exchange, I think, that just happens time and time again at those sorts of fairs. And actually on the way here, I was thinking about, the way that, natural wine is communicated about. And it felt to me as though, of course, you do have aficionados and you do have people who are, friendly and, are making wine, kind of invested in the name, the type of wine, getting it out there. But then I think you have publications, be that magazines, be that video, brands basically who will take a much more traditional approach and we'll maybe talk about natural wine as though it's this sort of something living off in the hills. It's something that's not necessarily close to them. But again, it's my own anecdote. I'll own this, but something that's it seems to happen time and time again. Though are people who are maybe writing or associated with the more traditional press. It's almost like there's this inbuilt response that you kind of have to dislike natural wine, or you have to at least be kind of mildly disparaging about it, just kind of look down your nose at it enough. But the thing that always amazes me though is, again, it's personal what that word means for you. But, I am now, think much more in terms of natural wine as something that's, it's low intervention, it's well made, maybe it's, less in the funky zone, less into super tannic orange wines and just drinking on the color of it, well made wines. But then it's surprising to me when I see so many of those brands who are maybe behind closed doors are kind of slightly disparaging about natural wine. They will then rate highly. They'll then put forward at tastings and in their own way kind of wax lyrical about wines that, to me, they're completely natural, but they're just really well made, and there's no sort of obvious clue about them being natural, and then also just secondly, I think it's an important point, the branding, they don't wear their naturalness on their sleeve, the branding is maybe more muted, it's just more simple, but to me, it's just a paradox that I just see time and time again.
Yes, I mean, it's a paradox, and I think you're right on all those comments. Well, I think a lot of journalists and people who love wine like playing devil's advocate as well. I mean, it's very difficult if you work for a national newspaper, even for but particularly for a national newspaper, and your readership, you're trying to gauge what they like. You're also having to reflect what the advertisers want you to do, and the advertisers are not small natural wine producers. And we happen to know that a lot of people who are slightly defensive about natural wine, it's because they can't recommend the wine for some particular reason. It's very difficult to recommend a wine that you don't know what it's going to taste. So imagine recommending a wine to your readership, and they try the wine and they say, that's filthy, or that's not what I like to drink. Now, I think the readership, particularly for national newspapers, it's not they're not sophisticated, it's that perhaps they're a little less adventurous. They want something they can take to a dinner party or have at the table, and it's not going to offend anybody. I think I know that certain journalists who are friends of mine have said whenever they try to recommend natural wines, they get massive kickback. And it's from below the line comments. It's like, how dare you recommend something that I can't buy outside my local Tesco's? And this is irrelevant because our company and a lot of small companies, well, we can send a bottle of wine around the world to the moon even if we need to. So the wine is universally available. Then it's a price point. How dare you recommend a wine which is more than $4.99? And it's because we don't have the conversation about what's in the wine, a $4.99 wine, and also whether it's being ridiculously heavily discounted and whether brands are paying for the price. So again, all these things should be part of the conversation, but they rarely are. It's just this headline, you can't recommend a natural wine, because if people are disappointed at my recommendation, then they'll stop reading my column and then, have a readership. So everyone defaults to safe. But a small anecdote from the Natural Wine Fair. This is the fair that preceded Real Wine Fair. There was a seminar, and it was, let's say, acrimonious affair. There was a panel of me and 3 sommeliers and a whole bunch of wine professionals, and I don't even remember what it was about, other than I was comparing it. And it was, it just was a bit of an atmosphere in there. And someone, a very famous master of wine, said, all the wines out there, and she sort of pointed to Borough Market where 120 growers are, all the wines are oxidized. And I said, what, all of them? I said, that's amazing. 600 wines are oxidized, are they? I said, I don't agree, as it happens. Anyway, for the she huffed and I puffed. And then another sommelier, very well-known sommelier, made a sort of slightly critical comment about this. And one of the sommeliers on my panel, who was very pro-natural wine, just basically swore at him really loudly and say, when we drink together, we go around and have a barbecue at your place, we only drink natural wines. Why don't you ever effing recommend them in your restaurant or have them on your wine list? He said, my customers wouldn't like them. I said, that's your job. Your job is to enthuse people about wine. They're not your customers. They're independent sort of human beings with thoughts and feelings. He said, yeah, but if they don't like it, etc. And I thought, oh, this is going nowhere, is it? Because if you're not adventurous enough to do this, if wine merchants can't engage, can't start the process of education without seeming like it's education, try the wines, make up your own mind. Everyone's got a lot of baggage, intellectual baggage, and because we've all been educated to think that wine should be clean and clear and fruity and obvious, then of course we reject something which is a bit sort of off kilter. But imagine we were in a much more sort of a freer frame of mind and say, I'm going to let the wine come to me. I'm not going to superimpose my values on it. Then you're more likely to get the moment of revelation, the epiphany. It may never happen, but it may well happen. This is how we change things. It's one palate at a time or one moment at a time. If you're in the environment of the Real Wine Fair, I sort of submit that there are so many good wines there to try that either the sheer volume of goodness will swing you, or you have one wine, you absolutely connect with it and the grower and everything, and then everything will make sense. All the things will fall into place. But otherwise, if you go with a negative attitude, then you'll create this negativity around you. And again, this is what I felt like so much when I taste with people. The people I really like and like me, then the wines sort of shine, weirdly enough. They seem to be in a good place. And people who are very super analytical and critical, they're looking for the fault in the wines. The wine repays them by being sort of faulty. It's like you'll find something bad about something if you look hard enough. But if you're in a really generous, open-hearted, as well as open-minded frame of mind, yes, you'll definitely find something delicious and beautiful. And I think this is what I keep on going back and forth, talking about energy. Good energy, in a weird way, breeds good energy. So the more positive vibes you have around things, then the more understanding you eventually end up with, because you feel the wine. Wine is quite an emotional thing. Our reaction to wine is quite emotional. And then you can do the intellectual stuff around that. If you treat wine as an intellectual exercise, you're forgetting the fundamental thing about wine. No one ever made wine for the intellect. It's a bacchanalian thing. It's to make you drunk, make you happy. It's to bring people together. It's a sociable drink. It's a gastronomic drink. It's to go with food. The idea that people are literally dissecting wine bit by bit and then measuring it up against some evaluative norm on points or scales or its architectural power, is just antithetical to everything that I think about that wine should be, which is, just like a delicious drink that binds us all.
Doug, we're already at that sort of time of the conversation, really, looking really towards in terms of closing. I'll share one brief anecdote before asking the final question, and it's, in a sense, really though, it's more a theme of anecdotes. It's more, if I speak to people who are not working in wine, I've noticed almost, there's always some variation of. But if I just say, oh, what wine do you like drinking, or what's your, what do you fancy drinking if we're out somewhere? The first thing is always, I'm not an expert. People always preface that, and maybe they feel intimidated by me. I actually think it's not just me being there. I'm not think I'm the most intimidating person. I think it's actually more the wine category itself that's intimidating them. And I think that a lot of what you've spoken about there has sort of crept into the language and just crept into the culture around wine. I think that's where, unfortunately, I think that it's seen as there is a barrier to entry for a lot of people. And I firmly believe, and again, the autobiographical piece bears that out. I totally see something like the Real Wine Fair as a great place to start, as somewhere with a very low barrier to entry, as somewhere with really friendly wine growers there, usually lovely locations, lovely food, a real sort of complementary experience, I would say, that kind of brings that forward. So again, in whatever way makes sense, as we sit here, I think around 8 or so weeks out from the fair, I'd love you to, I think, two things really. One, give us a preview of the fair, a sense of how formed that is and, what that's going to look like. But then also, maybe where relevant, a sense of how those things have changed over time. Are there elements that you've added over time that are kind of culminating now in the 2024 edition? And how is that looking for you?
Thanks. So about the fair itself. So the fair this year is the 28th and 29th of April. The Sunday is the 28th, and that is for consumers and trade, and the Monday is for trade only. But the fair is sort of, it's evolved since 2011-12, but I think it's just become more so and a sort of better experience, because as organisers, what we're trying to do is create a really lovely environment for the people who go there, and also for the producers. If you go to some really big events, they're very claustrophobic. People look stressed. You can't get near the tables. I'd like to think that we have organised an event where you'd like to spend at least 4 or 5 hours, and I think you need to spend that long. But you don't need to spend 4 or 5 hours drinking or tasting, because you'll just blow your palate out. And that's why we have a food element, and we've got particularly good street food stalls this year, I think. Coffee, beer, all the sort of things, all the necessities of life. So it's a wine fair, but of course it's an artisan fair as well. So yes, we encourage people to take a break, to have a rest, have almost like a picnic, and take time, and then plot your route. Don't overdo it, and take as much time as you need, as well as the usual, as well as the food stalls. There's seminars and masterclasses which are given by experts in the trade, and again, they're not pitched at a level of, let's say, a nerdy level, and they're pitched for everybody, and they're on different topics every year. So we normally have 3 or 4 on the Sunday and 1 or 2 on the Monday, and they'll be on different things. Something might be abstract. I quite fancy having a masterclass on the question of taste. What is taste, and is taste changing, or talking about the certainties of what is good and what is, for so many years, quality is seen as top end wine. Could a great wine come from a hybrid grape, for example? Yes, it could. Could cider be considered? Could we talk about cider, artisan cider, in the same way we talk about wine? Yes, we could. I want to sometimes explore these ideas and push a bit on the edges. Then, as I say, you've got the fair. It's about 185 producers, which sound gargantuan, but the space at Tobacco Dock is huge. It's got natural light, which is so important when you're tasting, because it just makes you feel good. High ceilings as well, and there's also a wine shop. It's a pop-up shop called Real Wine Shop, and it sells probably several hundred wines from the fair. So what a great opportunity to try before you buy. Not every wine on every table is going to be available in the shop, just maybe one or two from each grower. But it's great. Where else do you get the chance to literally sort of try, talk about the wine with a grower, and then go and buy a bottle and take home with you? And that the shop prices are good. They're effectively trade prices. So, and the shop has been very successful in previous years. And again, we try to improve it each year in terms of the communication, the labeling, and just have more people around to help. So there's a lot of people from us and from other wine companies that are just there to ensure that the fair is as good as it possibly can be. And of course, so many things are outside your control. The weather, for example, we've been extraordinarily lucky every year. We've had great weather, but it somehow I feel we're due for something else. But then in terms of the tickets are £25 for consumers, and which I think is quite good value. We've not changed the price pretty well since the beginning, despite inflation, because we're trying to attract people in, and we're trying to say, like, wine isn't pretentious. Although we welcome back people that have been in previous years with open arms, we really do encourage people to explore wine. Even if they know nothing, it doesn't matter. In fact, even better, because perhaps you come without preconceptions. Wine is a drink you can choose. You might drink beer, you might drink cider, you might drink something, cocktails. Try wine. Try the different flavors. It's not just one thing. It's not a generic. And when you see so many producers there making wines from 20 different countries, different regions within different countries, maybe 100, 250 different grape varieties, and a lot of which you may never have heard of or tasted before, you learn something, just by osmosis, really, So, and you won't like everything. You can't like everything. It would be strange. I don't like everything, but you will taste interesting wines and know that they're real wines, and you'll hear some really interesting stories about them and meet some fascinating people, both in the trade, but also, of course, the growers themselves. So there's always going to be some sort of element of communication. The more you give of yourself, the more you always get back. So I think that's a secret of any event which is successful. So the energy you bring is the energy you get back, and then in spades as well. I don't think there's anything more to say about it, but come and see it. Really, come and feel it. Come and taste it.
A massive thanks to today's guest, Doug Wregg of the Real Wine Fair and Le Cave de Pérène. Head to therealwinefair.com, link below, where you can register for tickets for either day. Sunday the 28th of April is open to the public and to the wine trade, whereas Monday the 29th of April is wine trade only. Doug has also kindly agreed to give a free copy of his fantastic book, The Real Alternative Wine Glossary, to anyone purchasing a ticket having heard this podcast. Just mention the code word WINEPOD, that's WINEPOD, in the on-site shop on the day. And if you do get to the show, make sure to say hi to Doug if you can track him down, and let him know you heard his fantastic interview on interpreting wine. I will be there on hopefully both days, so come and say hi, and see you soon.